Starting on Tuesday, June the 24th, Israel and Iran agreed to a ceasefire, which will lead to an interruption of hostile military activities between Israel and Iran. The question that I'm going to be addressing in this video is, will this ceasefire lead to a lasting peace, or will it merely amount to a tactical pause in the military activity between these two countries? In order to answer this question, we have to understand what caused this war to start to begin with. We have to remember that Israel started this war preemptively, and they have cited three main strategic goals for their military actions. The first of these goals is to eliminate Iran's ability to produce a nuclear weapon. Their second goal is to eliminate or at least severely curtail Iran's ability to launch long-range ballistic missiles against Israel. And their third goal, which is not clearly stated, but it is clearly one of Israel's intent, which is to encourage regime change in Iran. Now, Israel has stated several times that it would not cease its military activities against Iran unless it achieved these two main goals, and hopefully the third. So have these goals been achieved? The answer is clearly no. First of all, Iran still poses a major nuclear threat. Iran still possesses enough enriched uranium that would enable them to manufacture about 9 atomic bombs. In addition, it is now believed, as a result of analysis made by intelligence agencies in the United States, that the facilities in Iran that have been bombed have only been somewhat lightly damaged, and that these facilities can be rebuilt relatively quickly by the Iranians. In addition, new intelligence has emerged to suggest that the Iranians have other facilities, secret facilities that previously were not known of, where the Iranians are conducting nuclear activities. So from an infrastructure standpoint, from a physical standpoint, it's clear that Iran still poses a nuclear threat. So then the next question we have to ask is, will Iran continue its activities that will lead to the production of a nuclear weapon? And the answer is very clearly yes. Several Iranian officials today, the head of their nuclear agency, and also Iran's foreign minister, have clearly stated that Iran is going to continue with uranium enrichment. They are going to continue with their nuclear program. And in fact, Iran has actually discussed, Iran is currently considering exiting from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and it seems likely that Iran is no longer going to submit to IAEA nuclear inspections by the United Nations. So objectively speaking, Iran today still possesses roughly the same level of nuclear capabilities that it did before the start of the war, and they've stated their intention to continue their nuclear program. And in fact, it could be argued that Iran is even more motivated today to actually acquire a nuclear weapon. So from the perspective of Israel's first goal in this war, they clearly have not achieved it as of yet. Now let's look at Israel's second goal. Their second goal was to either eliminate or very much degrade Iran's ability to launch long-range nuclear missiles towards Israel. This goal has clearly not been accomplished. Iran still has more than half of its long-range nuclear missile stockpile. And we've been able to see that Iran definitely has the capacity to hit Israeli cities and Israeli targets from this long range. And in fact, the Iranians have become better at being able to evade Israeli aerial defenses in hitting targets within Israel. Now, Israel has had some limited success in destroying some of Iran's long-range missiles, and in particular, Israel had a pretty substantial amount of success in destroying a lot of their mobile launchers and some of the launchers from fixed locations within Iran. The problem is that these launchers are fairly easy to rebuild, both the fixed ones and the mobile ones. Therefore, from a strategic point of view, this second objective of the Israelis has definitely not been met. The Iranians still possess a strong capacity to hit Israel with long-range missiles. And in addition, they were able to reconstitute this capacity fairly quickly. Now, Israel's third goal was to effect or facilitate regime change within Iran, because the Israelis understand, and they know very well, that as long as this regime in Iran is ruling this country, the Islamic Republic and its leaders, that this will remain a mortal enemy of Israel forever. The stated goal of this regime is to wipe Israel off of the face of the earth. Iran does not recognize Israel's right to exist, and it has made it a matter of national policy to wipe Israel off of the map of the earth. This regime in Iran has an iron grip on its population. It has a very, very well established set of repressive institutions that are able to repress any sort of dissent within Iran, any sort of attempt at changing the government. It's going to be very difficult to accomplish within Iran. Therefore, this third, somewhat vague objective of the Israelis has not been accomplished. Now let's look at this situation from the perspective of the Iranians. The objectives of the Iranians in this conflict is actually the mirror image of Israel's objectives. Their number one objective is to be able to continue with their nuclear program so that they're able to actually develop the technology that would enable them to achieve nuclear parity with Israel. In other words, Iran wants nuclear weapons so that they're able to have that as a deterrent against the Israelis. The second clear goal of the Iranians is to greatly multiply their capability to launch long-range missiles towards Iran, and eventually missiles that can even reach the United States, which is their greatest enemy. It is their great Satan. And Iran has a very large and sophisticated industry in Iran that's dedicated to producing these missiles. Now, there's been damage that's been done to this infrastructure, but clearly it is one of the main goals of the Iranians to continue to advance their capacity in this particular regard. And of course, the overriding goal of the regime in Iran is to preserve itself. The rulers of the Islamic Republic of Iran, of this regime, will stop at virtually nothing in order to preserve themselves in power. In fact, it's very, very important to see that the Iranians believe that time is on their side, that if they can only preserve themselves in power, eventually they will be able to produce a nuclear weapon. Eventually they will be able to become a formidable power that's able to essentially be able to wipe out Israel with the production of thousands and thousands of missiles, that Iran would actually be a power that the United States would have to reckon with, because the Iranians will gain the ability to actually launch missiles that can reach the United States. So from a strategic standpoint, what Iran needs to do is buy itself time. And as long as this regime can maintain itself in power, then time is on their side. So let's come back to the question that I started this video with. Is this ceasefire going to lead to a lasting peace, or is this just a tactical pause? I think it should be clear by now from the analysis that I've provided that this is only going to be a tactical pause, particularly from the point of view of the Israelis, because none of their main strategic objectives have been met, and the existential threat that Iran poses to Israel is still very much there. In fact, it's arguable that the threat that Iran poses towards Israel today is even greater than the threat that they posed before this war started. Therefore, I don't think that there's any question that Israel is going to continue its campaign against Iran. In fact, the Israeli Armed Forces Chief of Staff today said that their military operations thus far are only stage one of their operations. It's just the first step in a much larger plan that has yet to be completed. In fact, I want to read to you exactly what the Israeli military's Chief of Staff, that's its highest position in the Israeli military, just said today. We are at the conclusion of a significant chapter, but the campaign against Iran is not over. We are moving to a new chapter based on the achievements gained in the current campaign. Couldn't be said any more clearly than that. The Israelis intend to continue this war until they have achieved all of their objectives. So the next question is when? When do the Israelis start with the second phase of this war? Here I think we have to look for two critical factors. The first critical factor is the support of President Donald Trump. The Israelis know that they can't do this all by themselves. They're going to require at least some level of support on the part of President Trump. At the very least, the providing of the type of armaments that Israel is going to need. And in this regard, Trump really wants to put an end to this war for two reasons. President Trump very much sympathizes with the Israelis, but this war creates a lot of problems for him. The first reason that it creates a lot of problems for him is that this has created a lot of division in his political coalition. A lot of President Trump's supporters are very angry that he's been supporting Israel, and they fear that he's going to get the United States in another endless war in the Middle East. And so President Trump wants to end this division within his political coalition. Now, the second issue that President Trump is obviously looking at is that he knows that a continuation of a war between Israel and Iran risks causing a major spike in global oil prices, something that could cause a major decline in the U.S. economy and in U.S. markets. So I do think that President Trump is going to do everything that he possibly can in order to try to restrain the Israelis from continuing with this war, given the risks that this poses to President Trump, his coalition, and the U.S. economy. And from the Israeli point of view, they're going to need to walk a very fine line between pursuing their own national interests, but also not alienating President Trump. The second major factor that we're going to need to look at here is the capacity of the Israelis to actually be able to sustain a prolonged war. The Israelis' capacity to be able to sustain a multi-month war of attrition. And here the Israelis face two major challenges. The first challenge is that in this conflict with Iran, despite the successes that the Israelis have had, they already know, based on what's happened in the last 12 days, that some of the missiles that Iran launches towards Israel are going to get through their Iron Dome defense system. And it's going to hit residential buildings, it's going to kill innocent civilians, and it's going to have Israelis on edge. It's going to have a negative impact on the Israeli economy. Therefore, a lot of Israelis also want to be done with this war because the war is very much damaging. In other words, it's not clear that politically speaking, Israel is going to be able to sustain a prolonged war of attrition against Iran. Now, the second major problem that the Israelis are going to have to deal with is that there are reports, and this is somewhat speculative, there's no confirmation of this, but there are reports that the Israelis are running out of the type of missiles that are required to intercept the Iranian missiles that are coming in. Now, if in fact there is any shortage of these missiles in Israel, this is going to serve as a hard limit to their ability to be able to prosecute this war against the Iranians, because Israeli cities would become sort of sitting ducks against the Iranian missiles. So one of the issues is that Israelis are going to have to take stock of their supply of these interceptor missiles, and they're also going to have to figure out how long it would take them to replenish the supply of these interceptor missiles in case they're running short. So I have two main conclusions from the analysis provided in this video. The first conclusion is that Israel has not obtained its strategic objectives, and therefore it will continue to prosecute this war at some point or another. The second point is that it's really not clear exactly when it is that the Israelis are going to resume their military activities against Iran. There are some unknown issues here. One of the unknown issues here is to what extent are they going to be able to count with the support of President Trump. A second unknown issue is how cohesive, politically speaking, are the Israelis going to be able to remain in the face of this very damaging war of attrition. And a third issue that complicates the timing is the fact that we don't really know to what extent the Israelis may be suffering from a shortage of their interceptor missiles, nor how long it would actually take them to replenish their supply of these missiles. So in the last part of the video, I want to just briefly go over what you need to be doing as an investor relative to the analysis that I've just presented. I think that the first thing that you need to take from this is that the level of risk is still very high, that eventually there's going to be some major disruption in global oil markets that actually could cause a major decline in US stocks and stocks around the world. That's very much a big risk. And so you need to structure your portfolio and your investments taking into account this risk. By the same token, the timing of when this is going to happen and when this could actually have a negative impact on your portfolio and markets is very, very uncertain. Certainly, the danger is not quite as imminent as it was just a few days ago. Therefore, I think that in your investments and your portfolios, you're going to need to strike a balance between, on the one hand, not abstaining altogether from investing in promising companies and promising investment theses, but on the other hand, keeping a very tight rein on risk, because this risk is still very much a live risk that could actually really bring down the entire global economy and the US economy. Now, I've had to make some important adjustments in my own investments in the two portfolios that I manage, in the two services that I manage. I have a conservative service called Successful Portfolio Strategy, which is offered on the Seeking Alpha marketplace. And there, I haven't actually made very many adjustments yet because this portfolio is managed a little bit more conservatively, but I do plan to make some adjustments in the context of what we've discussed here, which is that the level of risk, of macroeconomic risk, is still very high. But some of these risks may not actually manifest themselves in the short term, and we just have to be very alert to those risks actually manifesting. And then I have another service which is much more aggressive, that is actually designed to take advantage of situations like this in a much more aggressive fashion, and it's called the Crisis Opportunity Portfolio. And there, I'll be making some more important adjustments that recognizes the fact that the timing of these risks has actually become a lot more uncertain. Now, regardless of what you do as an investor in your portfolios, or even if you're not an investor at all, I really encourage you to subscribe to this channel, because we're going to be following this crisis very closely, and I'm going to be providing you with very in-depth analysis that you're not going to be getting anywhere else on how you need to be looking at the risks associated with this crisis between Israel and Iran. And more generally, I'm going to be talking about macroeconomic risks that are faced by the United States and the global economy independent of the situation between Israel and Iran. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.